All right, so what we're going to work on now is a little narrative dissection of some YouTube shorts that I was pointed to. And we're going to do that by looking at them through the three forces of narrative. So for those of you who haven't read the books or taken the class, the three forces of narrative are agreement, contradiction, and consequence, which we use the words and, but, therefore to represent those three forces, but you don't have to. You can use however instead of but, or yet, or except, or any other word of contradiction. Instead of therefore, so, that's much more common. We don't really care so much about the words. It's the three forces that matter. But for the class purposes, we're kind of sticklers for using the three words because they're like training wheels on a bicycle. We want you to really, really use them until you're good enough at the bicycle that you don't need them anymore. Now, these three forces have been called many, many different things over time, but they're all essentially the same thing. Instead of agreement, you could call it the setup. You could call it the thesis, the context. Instead of contradiction, you could call it the problem, the lack, the antithesis. Instead of consequence, you could call it the action, the results, the solution. But regardless, they all kind of boil down to the same three basic forces: the beginning, the middle, and the end. All right, so that is the lens that we're going to be looking at these YouTube shorts through, seeing what sentences, what parts specifically are the agreements, the setup, what parts are the contradiction, and what parts are the consequence. And today's YouTube shorts come to us, were pointed out to me thanks to Ron Plouffe. Not directly, I kind of heard about this through the ABT network grapevine that I am a part of. But Ron, he is a former big tech guy who got into communication and storytelling. So of course, if there was anyone who's going to give us a nice big chart of analysis, it would be him. And we're going to be looking at a YouTuber who just out of nowhere, maybe just a couple hundred views, skyrocketed upwards. And that YouTuber is Henry Belcaster. Here is all of the YouTube shorts that he's done. Now, his YouTube shorts have some of the most incredible numbers. Like his videos, his longer form videos do okay, but his shorts tend to do much better. And we're going to see if we can figure out why they suddenly started doing way better. And here's kind of the cutoff point. Here's the point where he got his first 1 million view video. And before that, maybe in the tens of thousands, and before that, kind of just in the thousands. With a few exceptions here and there, but yeah, still kind of on the low side. So what did he do in the beginning that he changed? That's what we are curious about. So let's look at one of his earlier videos before that he blew up all over the place. The 2021 marketing strategy in less than 50 seconds. Only 8,000 views on this video, crazily enough. And you'd think a video on marketing strategy, you'd think of all things that would go crazy on YouTube. It's about marketing. Shouldn't your marketing video be marketed to a mass group of people? Shouldn't a lot of people pick up on it? But the answer to that is no. Let's give it a listen, see what we hear.
Let me clue you in on this new wave of marketing we think we invented. Squatter marketing. The squatter law states that if you stay somewhere, if you squat somewhere long enough, that place, put simply, becomes yours. As these clips are rolling out and the hosts of the All In podcast are starting to take notice of our work, it was about 1 or 2 in the morning one night, and Dylan and I look at each other. And we haven't necessarily concretely heard from the All In guys, but we look at each other and we say, wait a minute, the All In podcast is our client. And we started celebrating because we realized, granted, we had the resources to make clips for the All In podcast, whether they hired us or not. So we were gonna squat all over their content until they either took us seriously or the exposure gave us enough exposure to take on new work. Squatter marketing.
Okay, interesting. Let's look at the transcript from that and see if we can figure it out. Now, apologies for the weird formatting. This is just how YouTube kind of formats their transcripts, and I was too lazy to fix it or do anything about it. So it starts out with, let me clue you in on this new wave of marketing we think we invented, squatter marketing. Now, this, I wouldn't even really count this as like a sentence of agreement, contradiction, or consequence. We see this a lot. You see this in TED Talks. You see this in presentations. This would be like the arouse statement of a arouse and fulfill dynamic. So there's this common dynamic that you see everywhere from TV shows to TED Talks, where you start off with something provocative that doesn't have a lot of context. Just enough context, just barely enough so that the audience gets a sense of what this is about, but doesn't really get like a full picture yet. Let's go into the main body. So that's the arouse. The rest of this is going to be the fulfill, where we actually get into the nitty-gritty. Squatter law states that if you stay somewhere, if you squat somewhere long enough, that place simply becomes yours. All right. This would be a sentence of agreement. And let's just use blue to highlight that. Yeah, we typically go blue for agreement, red for contradiction, green for consequence. So next part, as these clips are rolling out and the host of the All In podcast are starting to take notice of our work, okay, setting up more kind of context that we're giving. It's about 1 or 2 in the morning one night, and Dylan and I look at each other, and we haven't necessarily concretely heard from the All In guys. All right, this is like another statement of context, of setup. So we have context, and more context, and they're all kind of disjointed from each other. It's not like a clean through-line narrative. We're talking about squatter law, and then we're jumping to the clips we're doing, and then now it's 1 or 2 in the morning. Very disjointed. But we look at each other and say, wait a minute. So, buts, you gotta be careful with buts. They're not always statements of contradiction. You gotta look at what just came before. Like, is this kind of contradiction? Is this putting a spin or some kind of turn on what came before? All right, so they're up at 1 a.m., working on stuff. But we look at each other and we say, wait a minute. All right, so there was this normal pattern that was going on, and now that pattern has been disrupted. We'll call this a contradiction. But we look at each other and we say, wait a minute, the All In podcast is our client. All right, the next thing that happens, and we started celebrating. Now, this is an and statement, but I would say that this is a consequence. Here's a nice little rule for you. Try putting the word and or but or therefore at the beginning of the sentence and see which one makes the most sense. In this case, I think it's, and therefore we started celebrating. Yeah, I think this is a consequence. We look at each other and we say, wait a minute, the All In podcast is our client. And therefore, and so we start celebrating. Because we realize, granted, we had the resources to make clips for the All In podcast, whether they hired us or not. Okay. Whether they hired us or not. This is them realizing. So this is still realizing this is an action they're taking. So it's kind of consequence. It's a little murky. It could be agreement too. Let's just call it consequence for right now. We have the resources to make clips for the All In podcast, whether they hired us or not. So we were going to squat all over their content. This is definitely action now. Until they either took us seriously or the exposure gave us enough. The exposure gave us enough exposure to take on new work squatter marketing. That's probably just a summary statement. Squatter marketing. That's what this is. All right, so we have an A, B, T here, but it, like I said, it's kind of murky. It's like 3 somewhat false starts for what the A is. And for a narrative, where you start when you're trying to fix a narrative is you always want to look at what the problem is first. Because once you're really clear on what the problem is, you kind of build the rest of the narrative around that. But we look at each other and say, wait a minute, the All In Podcast is our client. So now they're going to put us to work a little bit and make us go, what? Okay, so what's the problem? The problem is that they don't really have a client right now. That's what I'm guessing. This ABT about marketing feels like it's aimed at an inner circle audience who already kind of knows all about these guys and like gets all the context of what they're doing, which isn't great. Which isn't great about a short for that's supposed to be about marketing toward mass audiences. All right. But we look at each other and say, so I think the real problem, if I were to rewrite this, the problem would be, but we weren't employed, but we don't have any clients right now. So just off the top of my head, let me clue you in on this new wave of marketing we think we invented, squatter marketing. So we're this new company, we're trying to get a bunch of clients, and if we do, we know we're going to blow up because we got the tools, we got the talent and everything, but it's not happening for us because we don't have any actual clients because we don't have experience. Without experience, you don't get clients. So we invented this new marketing called squatter marketing, where we basically have taken over doing the clips for the All In Podcast. We've squatted on what they're doing. So now they have the choice of either A, becoming our actual clients, or B, we use what we've done and spin this off to getting actual clients. There we go. We have like a little bit more, a little clearer of a problem if we take it from that route. Probably not perfect since I'm kind of just spitballing it off the top of my head, but just having a clearer problem to hinge the narrative around would help a lot, and kind of tightening up the and statements. Okay, so there we go. That's our first. Now let's jump to their first 1 million hit video and see if we notice anything different for this one. Keep your ears tuned for any buts and so's. I think they use so a lot more than therefore. Any buts or so's in the short. Yep, this one broke 1 million. So well done, Henry.
Want to know the biggest mistake a manager can make? Resulting. Let's say you have to make a difficult decision. An employee of yours is a brilliant jerk. They're so freaking brilliant, everything they do is a breakthrough for the company. But they also treat people poorly and they're difficult to work with. They're a jerk. So you decide, emphasis on decide, to fire them. That was the best decision you could make given the information you had. Now, here's the mistake. Let's say your company then has trouble hitting milestones, you aren't innovating, 6 months go by and you haven't grown, you think, because you got rid of that person. So you say to your team, God, we made a really bad decision. No, you're resulting. You didn't make a bad decision. You made the right decision, but now you're talking about the results. The book Thinking in Bets would say, make the best decision you can and don't get caught up in the results. So?
He even ends with the so. And he ends with the so because he wants you to fill in the blank at the very end, which was very, very, very smart. Let's look at the transcript for that one. All right. Want to know the biggest mistake a manager can make? Resulting. All right. Once again, brilliantly done. You see this in like the teaser scene for movies or TV shows at the very beginning. This kind of very intriguing but low context thing. You see this at the beginning of TED Talks. Well done. Now let's look at what the fulfill is. Let's say you have to make a difficult decision on an employee of yours. Is a brilliant jerk. They're so freaking brilliant. Everything they do is completely breakthrough for the company. All right, so this is all set up. This is all setting the stage. Now, in the last clip we saw, it was like setup and then another setup and then, kind of another setup. But they also treat people poorly. This is a contradiction on what just came before, and they're difficult to work with. They're a jerk. Yep, all kind of going farther and farther into hell, embellishing what the problem is. Very, very clear problem. Very, very well done. So, statement of consequence. So, you decide emphasis on decide to fire them. That was the best decision you could make given the information you had. Say this is kind of a continuation of the consequence. Information you had. Yeah, you had. All right. Now we're going to start with a new ABT, I think. Now, here's the mistake. Let's say, yeah, this is now more setup for the next ABT. Now, let's say your company then has trouble hitting milestones. Oh, no, this is, I think, another contradiction. All right, so let's just put an and, a but, and a therefore in front of the sentence and see which one fits the best. And now, here's the mistake. Let's say your company then has trouble hitting milestones. You aren't innovating. I think it's going to be but. But now, here's the mistake. Let's say your company then has trouble hitting milestones. You aren't innovating. 6 months go by. Yeah, this is contradiction. Yeah, and it really contradicts what just came before. That was the best decision you could make given the information you have. But now, here's the mistake. Let's say your company then has trouble hitting milestones. You aren't innovating. 6 months go by. You haven't grown. Because, getting into details about the problem, you got rid of that person. That's great. Even using the but because dynamic. So you use the but to give like a statement of the problem, then you use because to like go down into details. Very, very nice. So, statement of consequence, you say to your team, God, we made a really bad decision. So this is one of the forms of consequence. You kind of, here's the result. Here's we think what the result of our actions was. No, you're resulting. So we're contradicting what just came before. But no, you're resulting. So you didn't make a bad decision. You made the right decision. Yeah, I think this is consequence. We're getting very A, BT, BT, BT here, which I love. You didn't make a bad decision. You made the right decision. But now you're talking about the results. The book Thinking in Bets would say, make the best decision you can and don't get caught up in the results. So the book, yeah, I think this is a therefore. Therefore, the book Thinking in Bets would say, make the best decision you can and don't get caught up in the results. All right, so let's just zoom out here, take a look at the big picture. So just looking between these two, here's our first one from before they blew up. And here's our new one. Do we see any differences? Yep. So a little spoiler, this is basically what all of their newer shorts look like, especially what the ones that they just get so much traction on and so many hits. A, BT, 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 BT. We'll watch one more. I won't bother doing the narrative analysis on it like this because I think we're all starting to see the picture. But one more that hit 9 million, I think in part because of the ABT and in part because the topic is ice cream, and by God, you just can't go wrong with ice cream.
Ice cream cones were created by accident. It was the
arouse statement. Ice cream cones were created by accident. Oh, so now I want to know how ice cream cones were created. There's your arouse statement. Well done.
1904 World's Fair, St. Louis, Missouri. Zoom in on this guy,
Set up.
Arnold Forneshoe. He's running his ice cream stand.
And?
Ice cream, get your ice cold ice cream. Just a dime, don't be shy.
And
he draws a massive crowd.
And?
Daddy, I want blueberry.
And Arnold's just dishing out ice cream until he's out of dishes.
But.
So he panics.
Therefore.
Waffles, get your wafer waffles. Just
But
a
he sees
nickel,
this.
Don't be fickle.
Now, here's
So,
what we're gonna do, Ernest.
he makes a
I'll
deal.
buy every single last one of your waffles, and you're gonna throw them on your iron right there
fold them into a cone and give my patrons a vessel to eat their ice cream out of. You hear me?
The ice cream cone was born, and the invention later became the St.
And so-
Louis Cone Company.
There you go. ABT dynamics at work, and that's how you get 9 million views per short. Well, that and some really clever editing and a charming host. That also kind of helps.